afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to come down here today. My name is Detective Sgt Leslie Raymond. I am the Abuse Coordinator for Central Region OPP. And for you folks who are from the city, it's cottage country. So Central Region covers Muskoka, Simcoe County, Simcoe County, Caledon, Dufferin, Peterborough area, Northumberland area. There's about 14 detachments in that area. My background is a little different. I'm actually a social worker by education. Graduated from the University of Toronto with my Master of Social Work. Did my BSW in Laurentian. And I worked for the Children's Aid Society as a caseworker for 9 years. And decided for a variety of different reasons that I wanted to do something a little different. I always liked the investigative side of working for the Children's Aid Society. So I decided to jump ship and work for the OPP. Kind of come full circle, did a few years on the road doing general patrol, and here I land back in the area of abuse issues. So it's a really good fit for me, so it kind of keeps my skills and my education and background in social work, and yet I'm still enforcing the law, if you will, in the area of policing. So what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 45 minutes or so, a variety of different issues. We've called this Elder Abuse 101, and it is going to be very basic. I'm going to talk to you about basically what is elder abuse, what are the various forms of elder abuse, what are the signs and symptoms, how you might recognize if you yourself are being abused or if somebody you know is being abused, and what to do if you are a victim of elder abuse or you know of somebody who is a victim of elder abuse. I'll talk to you briefly about the role of the police and some resources that are out there. Because this is kind of a heavy topic, I always like to start it with something funny. So Fred and Ethel. Fred is 84, Ethel is 78. Fred and Ethel recently became engaged. Unfortunately, they had both lost their first spouses. They met at the retirement home where they live, took an instant shine to each other, and Fred popped the question finally. And thankfully, Ethel accepted. So Fred and Ethel are going for a walk downtown Toronto, and they pass a Shoppers Drug Mart. And Fred says, "Come on, Ethel, let's go in." So in they go to the Shoppers Drug Mart, and they go right to the back and they talk to the pharmacist. So Fred proceeds to ask the pharmacist a variety of questions. And he says, "Do you sell canes here and other walking assisted devices?" The pharmacist says, "Why, yes, we do." Okay, good. Fred ticks it off on his list. And Fred then asks, "Do you sell Insure?" The pharmacist said, "Well, of course we do. It's right down here on the shelf." Good. Fred ticks it off. Fred then asks, "Do you sell arthritis medication and other pain relief medication?" The pharmacist said, "Why, of course we do. We've got a variety of different brands." Good. "One final question," Fred says. "Do you sell Depends?" The pharmacist says, "Why, of course. We have a variety of different brands of those as well." Fred and Ethel look at each other. They're grinning. "Great! Can we use you as one of our bridal registry things? So when people give us gifts..." Okay. This is the definition that we in policing use to define elder abuse. It is very broad. We recognize that. But it is, in the next coming slides, we'll show you that elder abuse is very broad, and it can manifest itself in a variety of different ways. And what we know through our investigations and on the number of occurrences that we deal with is that the abuser could be a variety of different people. It can range from a family member, a friend, a caregiver, staff member at a care facility, a stranger, or anybody else upon whom the elder person relies upon for their basic needs and services. There really is no universal definition for elder abuse, and nor is there a standard age associated to it. Some people, and a lot of organizations use 65 to sort of be the cutoff point for when a person is an elder or a senior. We in the police aren't so absolute or strict as to when a person becomes a senior. It could be 55, it could be 60. There are a variety of factors that would determine when a person would be considered an elder, and when we would consider, if we got an allegation of elder abuse, if they're 50, for example, does that mean it's not elder abuse? Well, not necessarily. They could be 50 years old, but they could already have the beginning stages of dementia. Perhaps they have other sort of disabilities that are associated with aging. So there, as I say, there is no definite cutoff or starting point for when a person is an elder. So the first kind of abuse I will talk about, and I won't go into this in depth because I know the previous speakers have already spoken about this, is financial abuse. And this is probably by far the most common and the most pervasive form of abuse that is targeted towards seniors. It's basically the misuse or the theft of an elder person's property or money. Quite often, unfortunately, the perpetrators or the abusers are family members. It's unfortunate because usually we think we can trust our family members with our belongings, with our money. And we've heard from the last two presenters that they found this as well, that you cannot always trust your family members. And as we know, there are many scams going on out there, and they target the seniors because they are vulnerable. They take advantage of them, perhaps because they're lonely, because maybe they are starting to get a little bit confused or suffering from dementia, and they target them. And they're relentless. These people, that is their full-time job. That's how they make their money, is by scamming these people and by targeting the vulnerable people. That's how they get their money. It's unfortunate that a lot of people have fallen victim to these type of scams. How might you know if somebody you know and love, or it's a neighbor or a friend, is a victim of one of these scams or financial abuse? Some of the symptoms are, obviously, if they're getting bills, unexplained bills. So if they're getting bills and they never bought that product. Or conversely, if their Visa bills suddenly aren't arriving in the mail anymore, or other kind of bills aren't arriving. What these scammers do is they will change the address of the, say, the Visa bill. They'll change the address, and it'll get sent to their own address instead of the senior's residence, so the senior doesn't know of all the fraudulent charges on their Visa bill. Perhaps some of their personal belongings are starting to disappear. Maybe there's been a sudden change in their power of attorney or their will. That's a big red flag. If, let's say, they've had their children on or their spouse on as the power of attorney for a number of years, and then out of the blue they put their PSW on as a power of attorney. Big red flag if all of a sudden there's a change in that. If you find that they're becoming very secretive, if they're having secret phone calls, other secret sort of conversations, or other secretive behavior, be wary of that as well, if they are starting to hide stuff. If the older person suddenly has a new friend, particularly a younger new friend, and our previous speaker spoke about that as well. This recently happened to a friend of ours. I come from Aurelia, a good friend of the family. His father, early 70s maybe, starting to show early signs of dementia. This younger woman, at least 20 years younger. This man is single. His wife passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. He's very lonely. So this younger woman befriended him. We're not sure how he met her. He goes to a local restaurant downtown pretty much every day for breakfast and lunch. We suspect that's where they met. She latched on to him, was going to his house, becoming friends with him. She was taking him shopping. Appeared on the outside to him to be a really good friend, and she was doing all this nice stuff for him. He has a place in Florida. Next thing we know, she's going to Florida with him. She's going to drive him to Florida and spend a few months there in the winter. So we became very suspicious. Thankfully, his son had the guts and got up the nerve to speak with his father about this situation. Thankfully as well, his dad took his son's advice and stopped associating with this woman, because we saw that the father agreed that perhaps her motives weren't the best. We see that a lot. People all of a sudden coming into these elder persons' lives and taking total advantage of them. Some other kind of indicators that somebody might be a victim of financial abuse would be the obvious large withdrawals of money from their accounts. But also, all of a sudden, somebody decides not to spend their money. That can be a sign as well, because perhaps that other person is saying, no, don't spend your money because we need to save it for such and such. Or perhaps because they don't have any money left in their account. So if we, the police, were to get that kind of a call, there's a number of different charges that might be applicable for us to consider. The obvious would be theft, fraud, forgery, because quite often what happens is they'll steal the older person's checkbook, forge the checks, and make it out to cash and get a whole bunch of money. Theft by power of attorney. That is a charge in the criminal code that never used to be there until we found that this was on the rise, and it's a specific charge that deals specifically with powers of attorney who steal from these elder people. Another story I'd like to tell you about, friends of the family again. And these people, no signs of dementia, they got their wits about them, and as a matter of fact, less than a month prior to them becoming victims of this particular scam, they were at an elder abuse seminar where we talked specifically about all the scams that are going on out there. So this was fairly recent in their minds. They were aware of all the scams that are going on. Then one day they get a call, unsolicited phone call. So there's your first red flag. This guy, real good deal on a car. If you send me a check by, it was either Western Union or MoneyGram, there's your second red flag. It's for a very, very nominal fee. You will get this car. I don't recall the type of car. So the husband and the wife, they talked to each other. They said, yeah, that sounds like a really good deal. We could use a new car. So they go to the post office, get the money order from Western Union, send it off. Well, therein starts their nightmare. They started receiving phone calls upon phone calls upon phone calls, day and night. Literally, it was waking them up 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, wanting more money, wanting more money, wanting more money. My mother and I happened to be there for dinner one night, and they were explaining this story to me. They were very embarrassed as well. Very embarrassed that they were duped. And these are people that, they're smart people. They're not normally gullible people. I wouldn't call them vulnerable people. But it speaks to how good these people are at scamming, and how tenacious they are, and how, as I say, how good they are at convincing people what a good deal this is. So I decided, so the phone rings, and the phone calls were coming from all over the place. And unfortunately, we can't track the phone numbers because a lot of times they're from overseas, or they're routed through other phone numbers. And unfortunately, we try trace them and we just can't. So to locate these people, to identify these people, is next to impossible. So the phone rings, and I said, let me get it. So I answer the phone. And the guy starts in on his tirade. Why aren't you answering my calls? We've asked you for more money. Why are you ignoring me? So I identified myself as a police officer. Yeah, it didn't stop this guy. Well, he went on a verbal tirade, swearing at me, cursing at me, calling me names. He didn't care. So I just end up hanging up. The phone calls continued for several more weeks, to the point where these people had to change their phone number. It got that bad. These people were just beside themselves, so upset and stressed because of the constant harassment from these folks. There was a charge there. We could have charged them with harassing phone calls, but as I say, we can't identify these people. Really, really sad situation, but it speaks to, as I said, how good these people are at scamming people. I don't know if you can see that, but it says, "Hi, I'm the senior citizen who put you in here for telemarketing fraud." It's got a jailbird on one side and the senior citizen on the other. It says, so the senior citizen, the lady there says, "Send me $600 and I can see what I can do about getting your sentence reduced." Touché. So physical abuse. Unfortunately, this does happen far too often. And it can range from anything from shove, pinching, choking, slapping, punching, to worse, rough handling. I'm sure we've all heard and seen the stories on the media and read them in the paper about these seniors who get abused in long-term care homes and retirement homes from the staff. By no means am I saying it happens everywhere, everybody does it, but it does happen. And I'll give you another example that happened just yesterday in my area. Officer was called to a long-term care home. A student who was on a placement at this long-term care home, bless her heart for coming in and reporting it to us. So she was on a placement, so she reports to like her supervisor, who's a staff person at this long-term care home. The supervisor asked the student to help put this elderly woman to bed, and the elderly woman had dentures. So the staff person said to the student, "Could you help her or make sure her teeth come out before she actually goes to bed?" Fine. So off the student goes, and she's talking with the elder person, who's verbal, who's cognizant, who is very aware, and the student explains, we got to make sure your teeth come out before you go to bed. And the senior says, "Okay, fine, but would you mind if I took them out myself because my gums are kind of sore?" The student says, "Fine, go ahead." Just at that moment, the staff person comes into the room for whatever reason and sees the senior taking her own teeth out. The staff person, for whatever reason, has a fit, starts yelling and screaming at the student, says, "What are you doing? I told you to take her teeth out yourself." The staff person then proceeds to yank the dentures out of the senior's mouth very roughly and gets them out of the senior's mouth. As I say, thankfully, this student had the guts and the nerve to come in and report the situation to us. Not everybody would do that. And she recognized that it was wrong. I mean, obviously she's learning about this kind of stuff in school. And then our officer spoke with our abuse investigator at that detachment. And the abuse investigator, 2 weeks ago, was at our Ontario Police College at an elder abuse conference. And we talked about this very kind of thing. And so she was able to direct the officer as to what to do. So that obviously is an example of rough handling and something that did not need to happen, obviously. And that staff person now, thankfully, has been suspended pending an investigation. Another thing that we quite often see as well in homes and sometimes at residence as well is under or more commonly over medication so that the senior will sleep. So what are some indicators that a senior might be physically abused? Obvious one, unexplained injuries, perhaps some bruises, some scrapes, burn marks, grip marks. Granted, we all fall, we all get bumps and bruises and scrapes, but it all depends on where the bruises are, how the staff member or the senior person says they get those bruises, where the bruises are located, etc. And if they are sort of unexplained accidents. All homes are supposed to document any kind of accidents or anything like that that results in any kind of injury. So there should be a record of it. Number of different charges that we, the police, could consider if somebody is being physically abused. The obvious assault. Then there are various ranges of assault. Assault causing bodily harm, and that is a little more serious than general assault. And then aggravated assault. And that's an assault where the injury is quite severe. So it would require some kind of surgery, a broken limb, that sort of thing. Forcible confinement is another one. Quite often we see, particularly when we have seniors who tend to wander. Perhaps they're in dementia and they've got Alzheimer's and they wander. Some people, unfortunately, their only remedy in their mind is to lock the senior in their bedroom or in the apartment. Obviously, there's some serious concerns with that. So one of the possible charges would be forcible confinement. That's a little bit extreme. The next area I'd like to talk about is psychological abuse. And this is an area that is probably the most difficult to prove or to investigate. But people who have been the victims of psychological abuse, whether they be seniors or victims of domestic violence, say that it's far worse than anything anybody could do to them physically. Because they say bruises go away, the impact of psychological abuse lasts forever. And it includes verbal abuse, threatening, insulting, intimidating, humiliating gestures or behavior, perhaps isolating or shunning the senior, ignoring them, not allowing them to have access to their grandchildren or to friends, not considering their wishes, not treating them with dignity and respect, treating them like a child. An example, a kind of humorous example, and there's a lot of women here in the room. What do we do when we go to a public washroom and there's all the stalls and we go in one, you get in there, you're darn it, the lock doesn't work. So we sit down, we're like this, and then what do we do? Kind of like this, so nobody comes in, right? Because we want our privacy. So, yeah, we can all picture it. You can visualize it, right? We've all done it.
Wait, how does that go again?
Pardon?
What is it that we do again? Can you just shut up?
Oh, you want me to say? Yeah, and our pants are around our ankles and trying to be a contortionist. So we would expect that respect for our own privacy from anybody else. So why should it be any different for a senior? So consider seniors who are living in a long-term care home or any other assisted living home where they don't have locks on the doors for good reason, because particularly if they're experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's, we don't want them to lock themselves in the bathroom. So suppose they're in the bathroom with the door closed and the staff person just walks right in. Well, is that treating them with dignity and respect? No. So they should simply knock. Is it okay, Mrs. Jones, if I come in? Or Mrs. Jones, how are you doing? Do you need any help? Something as simple and basic as that. As I say, just treating them with the dignity and respect that we would want ourselves to be treated. It's no different. So how might you know if somebody you are working with or a family member or your neighbor is a victim of psychological abuse? You might find them depressed, withdrawn. They might be very tearful. They might cry more often than normal. You might find that they're excluded from events with their family or their friends. Low self-esteem is a big one as well. All of a sudden they don't have any more visitors because perhaps their caregiver isn't allowing them to have any visitors. There are a number of different indicators of psychological abuse. So if we the police were called and there was a suspicion of psychological abuse, there are a number of different charges that we would consider. Uttering threats. So if a person threatened to damage the elderly person's property, or belongings, or to hurt the senior themselves. Criminal harassment. Criminal harassment basically is, first off, the senior has to fear for their own safety, and somebody kind of has to be bugging them. So this applies to those door-to-door salesmen. If they keep annoying and harassing the senior, and the senior is able to say that this person is making them fear for their safety, we could consider charging that door-to-door salesman if they're that much of a pain in the butt and it's causing the senior to fear for their own safety. And we've all had those guys at our door. Harassing phone calls is another one for those people who continue to call and harass the senior. So I want to talk to you about neglect. This is probably also one of the more common situations that we come across. There's basically 3 areas of neglect. Active, passive, and self-neglect. Active neglect is when somebody intentionally doesn't look after the senior. Passive neglect is basically when the senior isn't getting their needs met, they're not getting looked after, but there's no intent on the part of the caregiver. They either don't know any better, perhaps the caregiver is so burnt out that they just can't carry on anymore. Not that that absolves them of the responsibility, but they aren't intending to neglect the senior. And then there's also self-neglect. We've seen those situations, particularly the hoarders. I'm sure lots of you have watched that show on TV and have seen the media cases about people who do hoard. Quite often, they will neglect their own care as well. So as far as the active neglect piece, this includes withholding medication. Obviously, the medication is prescribed for a reason. The senior needs it in order to take care of whatever illness they have. And what we find sometimes is, particularly with the pain relief medication, some caregivers will either use the medication themselves or sell it. We all know there's a big market there for drugs on the street. Leaving the elderly person in an unsafe place. Not providing enough food, not looking after their day-to-day hygiene. The house is a mess, that sort of thing. All those kind of things happen in the active neglect. They also happen in the passive neglect, but as I said earlier, there's no intent there for the passive neglect. And a couple of the charges here for the active neglect piece that we would consider laying in a case like this would be failing to provide the necessities of life. Quite often, and historically, this was a charge that we would lay when children weren't looked after very well. If kids weren't getting the medical attention, if we found kids weren't getting fed, etc. That was a very common charge. And now we're finding as well for seniors who aren't getting proper nutrition, proper food, proper medical attention, etc. It's a charge that's applicable to them because much like children, some seniors are very reliant on other people for their day-to-day living, including their feeding, their medication, etc. So, when we get a call about a possible elder abuse situation, what happens? What can we do? Well, the first thing is, and I've talked a lot about all these different kind of charges that we could possibly lay, but I don't have an exact statistic, but more often than not, I can say without a doubt, no charges are laid for a variety of reasons. The main reason is because the elderly person doesn't want any charges to be laid because quite often it is a family member who is the perpetrator or the abuser. And that's okay. Just because the police are called doesn't mean we have to lay a charge. Bottom line is they just want the abuse to stop. So what can we do? So we would want to hook up the elderly person with some resources in the community. And as well, hook up the caregiver. with some resources in the community, particularly if we're dealing with caregiver burnout. It happens. It's a very real situation out there, so they need some supports as well. If we are concerned about the senior safety and the abuse continuing, we would do some safety planning with the senior to make sure that they know what to do in the event that they're put in that situation again. Or if the door-to-door salesman continues to come around, we would arm them with some tools, some things to say and do to make the door-to-door salesman go away. Quite often as well, we are called to do what we call wellness checks for seniors. Perhaps a neighbor might call us and is concerned because their neighbor, Betty, hasn't been seen for a couple days, and that's not normal for Betty because usually she goes for a walk around the block every day. So we would go in and do a check to make sure everything's okay with Betty. That happens all the time. Sometimes we might refer to other agencies like Community Care Access Center to come in and do an assessment of the senior because perhaps the senior needs some in-home services. We might hook up the senior and try to engage other family members or friends to become more involved with the family, with the senior. And I'll give you another quick example. I got a call when I was working at a local police detachment. I got a call from the Community Care Access Center. She was concerned about this elderly woman. I believe she was in her 80s, and she had some suspicions that she may have been neglected by her son. Her son was in his 60s. So we go out there together. Thankfully, they let us in. You could smell the filth when we were on the porch. The inside of the house was that bad. So we go in the house. The house was a bit of a disaster. Mom was living in the living room on a mattress. I mean, that was her choice. But the reason why is because her bedroom had a leak. The ceiling leaked, and there was mold and still a leak in her bedroom. So clearly there was some issues with the safety of the house. So we had a number of different visits with the mom and the son. And we learned that there was no active neglect on the part of the son. Part of it was, that's the way the mom chose to live. No issue as far as dementia or Alzheimer's. She was totally with it. She knew what was going on, but she just simply didn't want to leave her house. Real concerns, health concerns about her circulation. Her legs, pretty much from the knee down, were almost black due to lack of circulation. Real concerning. So we contacted the doctor, spoke with him. He had done actually some home visits. Kudos to the doctor. That doesn't happen that much anymore. And as well, we had some real concerns about the home. You walk in their front entrance, we look up, and it's typical ceiling height. And there was plastic from the insulation. It almost hit your head, again, due to a leak. There was mold throughout this house. In the bathroom, you could see, but beside the tub, there was so much water damage you could see. There was a crack in the floor. You could see right into the basement. And it was the only bathroom in the house. So some huge safety concerns here. So we ended up contacting the fire department and the town. So they came in, did an assessment of the house. Long story short, the house ended up being condemned. Sounds awful, and we, in the eyes of this woman and her son, were probably the big bad police because we got her kicked out of her house. But long-term wise, it was for her safety and the safety of her son. So we end up, CCAC got more involved, got mom into a home. The son had some mental health difficulties as well, so we got him hooked up with some services. And in the end, was mom happy? Probably not, because she couldn't live in her home. But bottom line was, she's not breathing in that moldy air and didn't have a roof collapsing over her head. So that is a really quick example of how we, the police, will work together with our community agencies for the better good of the people who are living in our communities. Number of reasons why abuse isn't reported. The number one reason that we find is because the abuser or the alleged abuser is a family member or a primary caregiver for the senior, and the senior knows darn well if they call the police, there's a huge probability that that person, the abuser, alleged abuser, may be charged or not allowed to have any contact anymore with that senior. Now who's going to look after me? So in their eyes, dealing with the abuse, regardless of what kind it is better than having nobody to look after them, because they see that there's no other option. There's nobody else to look after them. And as well, sometimes they may fear that they may have to go to a home. You know, they're not going to be able to live in their home anymore, and they may have to go to a long-term care home, retirement residence, and that's not what they want. So they're very nervous about who's going to look after them. They worry that they're not going to have anybody to look after them. They also are afraid sometimes of making the situation worse. They fear what the alleged abuser may do to them if it gets reported. Particularly if the police come and there are no charges and away we go, and now the senior is left living with or having contact with that abuser, could make matters worse. And I won't lie and say that that's a very real possibility, because sometimes it does get worse. Oftentimes as well, they don't even know that it's a crime. The seniors don't know that what's happening to them is against the law or is wrong, morally, ethically, or legally wrong. And as well, they simply don't know where to go to get help. They don't want to call the police, and I can understand why somebody might not want to call the police. A lot of people don't know where else to go. And that's why we do these kind of education sessions and get the word out there to seniors themselves, to people who are friends of seniors and family members, so that people know there are places to go. There are people who care. There are other alternatives out there. And quite often as well, people are told it's a civil matter. There's nothing that the police can do. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And even if there are no charges, if we, the police, cannot lay a charge, that's okay. As I explained, just because we're involved doesn't mean that somebody is going to get charged or hauled away in handcuffs. We would rather stop the abuse and hook up the senior and the caregiver with other services in the community. Because as I say, bottom line is we just want the abuse to stop. So bottom line is our primary goal is to stop the abuse and to protect the public. So we want to make sure victims are safe. Obviously, if we get a call on elder abuse, we're going to investigate. We're going to try to determine what's going on here. But as I said earlier, we work with a variety of different local agencies and networks to come up with the best possible solution. And certainly in my area, and I'm sure the same is true here in Toronto, there are networks. We call it the Elder Abuse Network, which is a group of community representatives from a variety of different agencies, as well as consumer reps. So we've got seniors on our committee as well. And we meet monthly and we talk about cases. We do education in the community. We offer seminars so that we're kind of like a team. And quite often I'll get an email or phone call from somebody on the network saying, I've got this situation, this is what's happening, who should I call or what can we do? So word spreads, we get everybody together and we come up with a good solution and some alternatives for that senior. And as well, there's agencies out there that deal specifically with victims, not just elderly victims. So we would connect the senior with those agencies as well. And yes, if the senior wants the person to be charged, and if we have enough reason to believe that a criminal offense has taken place, we would lay a charge. And in those kind of situations, we would charge the person, we would arrest them, and oftentimes, more often than not, the arrested person would have conditions placed upon them. And one of those conditions would be no contact at all, directly or indirectly, with that senior. And that's to ensure the victim's safety. That's to ensure that the senior doesn't have any contact anymore with this person, so the person can't perpetually abuse the victim or harass the victim. I like this quote, and our previous speaker kind of spoke to this as well. It says, "The prevention of abuse and neglect of older adults is a community challenge which will not be resolved quickly by one person or one approach. It will require a community effort to create an environment which reaffirms the rights of older adults to self-determination, respect, and dignity." And we used to say the same thing about children. It takes a whole community to raise children. Well, it's no different with our seniors. It is a community effort. It's a community problem, and it's more than just one person or one agency's responsibility. I've got a few resources here that are available throughout the province. Senior Safety Line. It's a phone number that you call, whatever question you have. Second one there is a phenomenal website. This is the old Phone Busters website. It's www.antifraudcenter.ca. On that website, there's a variety of different resources, anything to do with fraud. And they've got all the latest scams on there. And you can download a little book. It's called The Little Black Book of Scams. And it highlights... pardon?
It's a how-to manual.
It's a how-to, yeah, it's a how-to manual, exactly. But it's a good resource if you want to know all the scams that are going on out there. And they, as well on that website, they'll have all the latest media releases for the scams that are going on in the province. They've got stats, all sorts of things. It's a phenomenal website. ONP, that stands for the Ontario Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. info@onp.org. It's a great website as well. And as well on that website, they will have links to different conferences, workshops that they're putting on. Crime Stoppers, 1-800-222-TIPS, and obviously your local police. Do you want me to leave that up for a little longer, or has everybody got it? Yeah, leave it up? Okay. And that, as I say, that's just a few of the key ones that are available throughout Ontario. So no matter where you live, these will be resources for you. And the next slide is just my name anyway, so I'll just leave that one up there. Does anybody have any questions? Anything they'd like me to go into a little bit further? Anything specific? Yes?
What would you do if it's a case of self-neglect?
So the question was, what would we do if it's a case of self-neglect? Good question. And it's one that we deal with quite frequently. And I think of those hoarders. It would depend on the extent of the self-neglect. If it's to the point where the senior is at any significant health risk, we may have to intervene and do something like I did in that case where the CCAC and the fire department and local town became involved. If it's a hoarder, for example, and perhaps maybe they're not as clean as we think they should be, people, regardless of whether they're seniors or not, have a right to live the way they want to live. If they want to be dirty, if they want to have their house a mess, so be it. As long as their house isn't such a mess that they can't get to a door in time if there was a fire, or if they aren't, if the outside of their house isn't such a mess, again, that you can't, the fire department or an ambulance couldn't get in the front door. So there's a balance here between safety concerns for either the senior's physical safety, their health, and allowing people to live the way they choose to live.
You mentioned that you can put some kind of parallel restraint order
Yes.
on a perpetrator
Yes.
to not to contact the victim anymore.
Yes.
What in a more complex situation, say in a long-term care home, where the both perpetrator and victim are living in closest proximity to one another, how would you deal with that?
Well, if there were charges.
Repeat the question.
Okay, so thank you. The question was if there was an abuse in a long-term care home and the abuser was a long-term care home staff, right?
No.
A resident, another
This has
resident.
happened, you know,
Okay,
yeah.
very good question. So if the perpetrator or the abuser is another resident, very good question. Happens quite frequently. And a couple things. Number one, with new legislation that has recently come out with respect to long-term care homes and what they shall do, they have a responsibility primarily to protect the victim. So if that means hiring more staff, putting the abuser in a different location in a long-term care home, they have a responsibility to make sure that those two don't have any contact. Secondly, if the abuser was charged by us, one of the conditions may be not to live at that long-term care home or not to have any contact with the victim. So that abuser's family member, whoever is their power of attorney, would have to locate another place for that person to live. Sounds rather extreme, I know, and in all likelihood what would happen is we would work with the long-term care home to come up with some alternate solutions, if it was feasible for the abuser to stay in that home. But yes, that happens. Yes?
Is there a law that would say that that person would have to be moved out of that facility?
So the question was, is there a law that says that person would have to be moved out of that facility? Short answer is no. But as I say, long-term care home has a responsibility to protect that victim. Simple as that. However they choose to do that. Oh, I think my time is up because I'm getting this. I'm getting the hook. Thank you very much, everybody.